What a tone shift we've had in the Mark Andrews situation over the last handful of hours. We talk about the Ravens' shaky comments on Andrews' future, a major trade update brought to light about what has happened with Mark Andrews and what could potentially happen in the future from NFL insiders. Plus, we get into what John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta had to say at the Liars Luncheon, and Rashod Bateman getting cryptic. All that and more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. We are here. Welcome into Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here on this midweek edition of the show, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available on all podcasting platforms. So if you are a video watcher on YouTube, you can hit that like and subscribe button. If you're an audio listener, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, including here on Locked On Ravens, you can find us wherever, and you can hit that follow along and subscribe button as well. Really appreciate all the support here. We're a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens podcast, so every Monday through Friday, we have you covered with daily Ravens coverage. Plus, we go live after every single Ravens game, after every piece of Ravens big news, and we even have some bonus episodes on the weekend as well, and we are almost 1 week away, 1 week, 1 day away to be exact, from the 2025 NFL draft. And there is so much that the Ravens could do with their roster, could do with the draft capital. They have 11 picks. But yesterday, John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta sat down with local media for their annual pre-draft press conference, which is more or less known as the Liars Luncheon. Obviously, Eric DeCosta, John Harbaugh, not going to give away Baltimore's entire draft board or anything like that. But in the Liars Luncheon, there was a question about Mark Andrews and his future. And Eric DeCosta was very non-committal about it in what has been a huge tone shift in the situation since the Ravens decided to let Mark Andrews' $4 million roster bonus get into motion and be accepted. So we'll talk about what DeCosta had to say and also some of the updates we've heard and some of the opinions we've heard from NFL insiders, including Ian Rappaport and Mike Garafolo, on the situation. And then we will dive into, in the second part of the show, Rashod Bateman getting cryptic on social media. But we're going to parlay that into a bigger conversation about Bateman, his play, and his contract. Then in the final part of the show, we'll go back to John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta. So a bit of a John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, Liars Luncheon sandwich here as we talk about the rest of what they had to say about draft and a lot more. So Mark Andrews, a lot of updates coming in, a lot of comments coming in about Mark Andrews. And obviously the big storyline here is what Eric DeCosta had to say. And this, honestly, it's been a pretty back and forth situation, if we're being honest, really ever since the Buffalo loss, where Andrews obviously had, I think, the worst game of his career in terms of magnified moments. Andrews has been touted as a trade prospect for Baltimore, their most valuable trade chip, someone they could definitely move. And I mean, rightfully so. You have a guy who is on the last year of his deal. You have a guy waiting in the wings in Isaiah Likely to take over as the number one tight end, who is also in the last year of his deal. You know, it makes some sense of Baltimore to move on from Mark Andrews, free up some cap space. But as I mentioned, $4 million of his contract now stays on Baltimore's books, with that roster bonus being picked up. So during the Liars Luncheon, John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, they were asked a bunch of questions. Eric DeCosta was asked about Mark Andrews and his future with the team. He was asked if he fully expects Mark Andrews to remain with Baltimore this year. Here is his answer. He said, quote, "Oh man, I never know what's going to happen, and I would never want to say this or that, but I can tell you this. Mark Andrews is a warrior. He's played his butt off for us. His competitiveness, his talent, his attitude, his leadership is so valued here. He's a great player, and I think we're in the business of keeping as many great players as we can." So there's always a lot of unpredictability with the draft. You just never know. Then he went into kind of a different tangent about if they've ever traded away one of their own players in the draft. They talked about Marquise Brown, but Eric DeCosta said, well, I made that deal before the draft. Nobody knew about it, which we've talked about here on this show before. But he said, I don't think we've ever traded one of our players during the draft. So again, there's a lot of flip-flopping here, a lot of uncertainty with Andrews. What I do know is this. Mark Andrews is still a very, very good football player. I understand that, you know, if you want to call him a playoff dropper, I'm not going to argue with you there. I think that his regular season success does not compare to what he's done in the playoffs. He's had a lot more success in the regular season. But I still think Mark Andrews is a top 5 tight end and does have a lot of value to Baltimore and their offense. But here's the other side of that coin. Isaiah Likely is more than ready to step in for Andrews, as I mentioned here. And based off of some of the stuff that was being said about Andrews and some of the updates that we have gotten over the course of this process, look, I feel like Baltimore is very confident in Isaiah Likely, but where does Andrews fit into their equation? He still has a place in the Baltimore offense. He's still a very valuable piece. He and Lamar Jackson have a very valuable, built years of chemistry together. That doesn't just grow on trees anywhere. Now, Lamar and Isaiah Likely are establishing their own, but regardless. Now, on the podcast, The Insiders, which has Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, Mike Garafolo, they played the clip of DeCosta talking about Andrews, and then each of them took their turns going and talking about the situation. Mike Garafolo, he gave some information about the status of Andrews and what was going on prior to these comments. He said, quote, both of these guys, talking about Mark Andrews and Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles, he placed both these guys in the same conversation. He said both of these guys were available at the start of the league year. Nothing materialized at that point. I would say neither one right now is imminent from my understanding. Now, could that change as that gets closer to the draft? Could a lot of it depend on what teams get in the draft? Perhaps. As of right now, again, nothing imminent. If their teams don't get back what they want in a trade, they're going to hang on to them and keep them as a key part of their offenses this year. So from these comments from Mike Garafolo, you can take a couple things away. First of all, from his report here, his update, Mark Andrews was available at the start of the league year. The Ravens, whether they were actively trying to move him, with efficiency or I guess with a quickness, or whether they were just kind of testing the market and seeing what they were going to get, that's not specified here. But, we've heard from multiple different people, and now Mike Garafolo talking about this as well, like the rumblings and rumors and reports of like, hey, Mark Andrews is kind of available, like if he can be had for the right price, but it feels like Baltimore wants a high-level draft pick, and I don't blame him. Mark Andrews is still a very good tight end, one of the best in this league, in my opinion. But the fact that nothing's imminent, I also understand, because if anything, I would expect this move to happen, if it did happen, on draft night. That's when I would expect it to happen. Because you can talk about what Tom Pelissero had to say. He said, to your point, these are the types of trades that sometimes do get done during the draft as teams fill their needs or not. So, this tight end class, there are a couple of guys that make sense for teams, but maybe one of the teams that is interested in a Colson Loveland or Tyler Warren, they don't get that guy. And all of a sudden they're sitting there scrambling and saying, well, what if we pivot to Mark Andrews? Like, what if that's a Chargers team? We've talked about a lot. Like, there are plenty of scenarios where Mark gets traded during draft night. Now, it doesn't make as much sense with the option being picked up, with that roster bonus, being picked up and having that actually count against your books. I think that the Ravens probably, here's what I think happened. Again, there's no merit behind this. This is just my guess, is the Ravens were shopping Mark Andrews. They were trying to move off of him, and they just didn't get what was worth it in a deal. And here's my thing with the situation in general. If you're going to get a pick for Mark Andrews, it has to be worth it. Like, I'm not trading Mark Andrews just to trade Mark Andrews. He can still be a focal point of the offense, still a very valuable player. Look, it was a bad game against Buffalo. He's had more bad playoff moments than that, but he is still a guy that can help you. And the fact that he and Isaiah Likely can play in tandem with one another, they can feed off of one another. Like, look, I think for Isaiah Likely, he's ready. He is ready. And beyond this season, if Andrews stays, it should be Isaiah Likely's job. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Mark Andrews should be gone. Isaiah Likely should be the one who is signed to the lucrative extension. But I think for one more season, it's okay, because you're probably going to get a 4th-round comp pick for Andrews anyway if he walks in free agency. So I'm saying, hey, don't trade him for anything less than a day 2 pick. Like, a 3rd-round pick is probably that line for me of where I would go. And maybe this is a situation where you combine a pick with Mark Andrews. Like, could you combine Mark and a 4th for a 2nd? Like, could you do something like that? That would be worth it to me. But to just trade him for a 4th, I get the cap savings would be significant, not as significant as if the bonus didn't exist on the Ravens books, but still significant at $7 million. It makes sense. And Brian McFarland provided some context. Ravens salary cap, who obviously is the go-to guy. We've had him on the show multiple times. He knows his stuff when it comes to the Ravens salary cap. He mentioned that Andrews, unless they agreed to postpone the due date of the bonus, he was due that $4 million roster bonus on March 18th. So again, that cap savings, it is $7 million, not $11 million. Now, Ian Rappaport, he weighed in on the situation, and he said that he feels like the situation is very, very much up in the air. And he said, based off Eric DeCosta's comments, he said, I wouldn't be surprised based off what I'm hearing here if some team does come in and make an offer the Ravens can't refuse. He talked about how teams like to have these types of players locked into big lucrative extensions before the year. Andrews is in that situation. Baltimore got that deal done. Is that the same as a likely? We will see. Or they're going to try to extend Andrews and trade likely. I'll tell you right now, that's don't. No. We're not doing that, hopefully, if you're the Ravens. But either way, they're going to have to decide one way or the other. Everybody here knows my stance is that I prefer likely to Andrews long-term. I think that's the mindset of a lot of different people. But there's just so much going on around Andrews, and it feels like this situation changes every couple of weeks, if we're being honest, where, again, if DeCosta didn't have the comments, because, he could have said something along the lines of like, oh, well, Andrews is going to be a guy that, the other could have just straight up said, hey, he's going to be on the team. And who knows if that would be a quote unquote lie or not. I mean, I'm sure the Ravens don't know what's going to happen. And the reason DeCosta went with the line of comment he did was because there is still a chance Mark moves. Now, is that chance highly likely? I probably wouldn't classify it as that. I would probably say, honestly, I'd probably say it's 40-60 in terms of he goes, he stays. So I think it's 60% he stays, 60% he stays, 40% he goes. And the reason for that is I do think a team will come in with an offer. And, kind of like what Ian Rappaport said, is it an offer the Ravens can't refuse? I don't know. But is it an offer that gets the Ravens thinking and maybe meets their minimum threshold point? That could be it. When a team doesn't get a tight end that they want, and they say, okay, now we're going to have to trade draft capital to go get a guy we know is proven because there's nobody else we can take, and that's a weakness. So at this point, I'm not sure the Ravens are actively shopping him. I mean, again, I don't know. From what Mike Garafolo had to say, the Ravens, it looks to be that they were doing that when the league year started. They didn't get what they wanted in the deal. They pulled him back off the market and said, hey, we're just going to keep him, see what materializes. And if they do get a solid upgrade in terms of what pick they are being offered 9 days from now or the draft 8 days from now, and what they were being offered before, that is worth the $4 million, depending on how good that is. But I do want to make it clear again that losing Andrews would be a big loss for the Ravens. Again, you can't keep everybody. It is what it is. Isaiah Likely's more than willing to step up, and he's more than capable of doing it. But I think that, again, having the 2 tight end headed monster, even 3, if you want to throw Charlie Kohler's name in there, if you're a big Charlie Kohler believer, I mean, that has value in itself. And, you have to weigh how much impact Andrews has versus how much of an upgrade you'd be getting in draft capital or the cap savings you'd be getting, the timing of the cap savings. I mean, if that cap saving came on day 1 of free agency, maybe they're able to sign another guy that got signed by another team on day 1. And now there just aren't as many options. So we'll see what ends up happening. But again, multiple different ways that this could go. And I'm sure we'll get more updates, more inklings of information about what's happened in the past, what could happen in the future. But Eric DeCosta, he certainly was very non-committal on Mark Andrews, which again, just adds even more intrigue to this entire situation. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll put what John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta had to say on the back burner for the Liars Luncheon. We'll get into Rashod Bateman because he had some very interesting comments, or I guess it was just one comment on social media, and posted a video of himself grinding this offseason. So we'll talk about what he had to say. I was a little bit cryptic, and also just talking about Bateman in general. Stay tuned. We got a lot coming your way on the show. First, the show is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. You can post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip, the hashtag hiring frame. You can add that to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. And LinkedIn has so many helpful features that can help you navigate everything you need to when it comes to posting your jobs over on LinkedIn. So Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Again, post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back. Second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Wednesday edition of the show, talking Ravens football. We talked about the seemingly ever so changing Mark Andrews situation in Baltimore, hearing different things, NFL insiders giving insight into what's happened in the past and what maybe could happen in the future with Mark Andrews, because Eric DeCosta, very non-committal, as we talked about at the end of the first part of that segment there we did about Andrews and his future with the Ravens. John Harbaugh, he said, and it was very contrary to what John Harbaugh said. John was like, he was like, all right, hey, this is a guy that we like, fully expect him to be here. Eric DeCosta was kind of like, maybe slow your roll on that, John, a little bit. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. I think after the draft is probably the deadline for anything. I just don't think it's worth it after that. I think after that, you just keep him for the season and then let him go and you get that fourth round comp pick, or, what should be around a fourth round comp pick. But we're going to talk about what John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta had to say more in depth about draft prospects, draft positions, Darius Washington, a lot of that coming up in the final part of the show. We're doing a little bit of a liar's lunch and sandwich here with Rashod Bateman smack dab in the middle for our second part of the show. Rashod Bateman had a breakout season for Baltimore in 2024. I mean, he was a guy that a lot of people had high expectations for, and a lot of people had a lot of hope for. It had been a rough couple of years for Rashod Bateman, and whether that was battling injuries or just not producing, not having time with Lamar on the field, Lamar Jackson, it just wasn't working. But Bateman burst onto the scene last season, just shattered most of his career highs, yards, touchdowns. He had 45 catches, 756 yards, and 9 touchdown catches on the year, establishing himself as a very, very reliable target in this Ravens offense. Now, he should be able to build upon that this upcoming year. He posted a video of him working out on social media, and he captioned it, "Wi-Fi for year 5, hella chaos." So, Rashod Bateman coming for it in 2025. But before that, so this all happened literally like 8:30 in the morning, and the Ravens also announced that they were having the press conference with John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta. Almost, I think that was also around 8:30 in the morning, if I'm not mistaken. That was like day of type stuff. I didn't even know what was going on, because the announcement, at least what I saw, I'm like, oh, okay, this is happening today. Yeah. 8:45 in the morning was when the Ravens announced the press conference with John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta. But at 8:30 in the morning, Rashod Bateman just puts out, "Know your worth. Know your worth." Now, with cryptic tweets, I always want to preface it by saying this could have absolutely nothing to do with the Ravens. And I don't want to talk about it for the entire segment, because I think that would be doing a disservice. This does not really dictate what we're going to talk about in this segment. Because, look, for me, if this is about the contract, Bateman's whole situation with his deal, for those that don't remember, there was some big miscommunication with Bateman not reporting to camp, and it was a couple of days, and that ended up voiding his 5th-year option, which, would have been much more of a chunk of change than he's getting right now. Rashod Bateman, in my opinion, is on the best contract in the league. So Rashod Bateman fired his agent. It was this whole misunderstanding, and he ends up losing that 5th-year option. So when the Ravens picked up an FIO's 5th-year option last year, there was no Rashod Bateman 5th-year option because it had been voided. So the Ravens essentially had all of the leverage, because, again, Bateman had not had the season he had had. So it was injuries. It was, can he stay healthy? Like, there were all these questions. So Rashod Bateman opted for some long-term security, which, again, I do not blame him. I don't blame him at all for doing that. I think, honestly, it was probably the smart decision based off of where he was in his career. I think a lot of people knew he could break out like this, but football can be a crazy sport, and an injury can happen at any time. So Bateman ended up signing a 2-year extension with the Ravens worth $12.8 million. So he now enters that extension right now. Last year was the last year of his rookie contract. So he's going to have a $5.1 million cap hit this year and a $7.8 million cap hit next year before hitting unrestricted free agency as a 28-year-old in 2027. Again, unbelievable value, especially, you look at the wide receiver contracts around the league right now. Like, you're seeing Josh Palmer get $10 million plus per season. You're seeing all these guys that aren't as good as Rashod Bateman, in my opinion, getting tens of millions of dollars per season. if Bateman hit free agency this past offseason, like in March, he would have made 10 plus million. Easy per year. But Baltimore gets him in a bargain because of the misunderstanding. So for Bateman and this whole thing about know your worth, like I understand if it is about the Ravens, where he's coming from with it, where his contract, he's someone that, would be making a lot more right now had that whole thing not happened. But regardless, he's in line if everything stays the way it is, and if he continues to ascend, he's in line for a big payday. Now, what does it mean to Baltimore's offense? I mean, he obviously has the ability to stretch the field over the course of his career. I mean, you want to look at last season, 16.8 yards per catch for Bateman. His career high was in 2022 when he had 19, but he's never averaged, below 11 per catch for a year in his career. He's a guy that can stretch the field. He's obviously a great route runner. He's, short intermediate guy. He can get you yards there as well. He's not like your typical chain mover type guy, but he can do that for you. Like, again, if you want to trust a guy in that situation, Bateman can be that guy. You can also trust Zay Flowers. You can also go to Mark Andrews, likely. Like, now DeAndre Hopkins is in the fold. But what he has turned into is an extremely reliable wide receiver 2 for this team. I personally have Zay as wide receiver 1. I know some people want to flip-flop that and say Rashod is number 1, Zay is number 2. I mean, I understand, but I just feel like at this point, Zay is your guy, and then Rashod is also your guy, but I just feel like Zay is 1 and Rashod is 2. The fact that they haven't won that deal is really, really big, especially with their cap situation. So for Bateman, he's going to be in line for a big extension if he continues on the path that he is. But for what he brings to the table, whether that is stretching the field or, having some opportunities in the short and intermediate passing game as well, for me, it's about the improvements that we've seen. 2022 was a rough year all around for Bateman. He only played in 6 games in 2022, but, he had a 14.3% drop percentage, mainly because he didn't get a ton of targets. I mean, he only had 28 on the year. That was by far the lowest total of his career, but we've seen that number drop with more action, with more reps, from 14.3 to 7.1 to 5.6. His rookie year, it was 2.9. But again, you're seeing the drop from his second season in the league, which I think is really, really important. He had 35 first downs in 2024, which marked, again, the career best for him. I just think he's a valuable piece for your offense. Like, again, the Ravens have so many different weapons, plus you have so many other options you can use. Like, Bateman, I don't want to call him an afterthought because I think, it's not what he is. He's a big part of what they do. But, when you're thinking about who you need to account for, it's obviously Lamar and Derrick Henry 1-2. You have to figure out Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews. You got to figure out where's Isaiah Likely on the field because he's a matchup nightmare. Even DeAndre Hopkins. Like, I'm not putting DeAndre over Rashod. I just want to make the point of like DeAndre being a veteran, having that experience. But, Rashod Bateman feels to me like the guy, like, he's been left off of graphics from big social media sites or big NFL sites at times. Like, he just feels like an afterthought, and that's not how he should be treated because I want to give him all the credit in the world. There were so many questions facing him in year 1. Obviously, when he suffered the injury, had to come back, game 6 of the year, I think, against the Colts. Or no, against the Chargers was his debut. But then he also had the other injuries, and him and Lamar didn't get a lot of time. There were so many questions, so many guys who didn't believe in Rashod. And, I was one of the guys who was like, hey, this is the big year for Rashod last season. Just stick it out, right? See what he gives you this year, and then you can reevaluate. He was incredible. And, I give him a ton of credit. So regardless of if the cryptic tweet is about the Ravens or not, Bateman will certainly know his worth when it comes to whatever contract he gets next time up. Again, if he continues to go on the path he is, he'll likely like the payday that he's going to be getting there. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll move back to John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, talk about what they had to say at the Liars Luncheon about the draft and positions that they could be looking at. Stay tuned. We got plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals, assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Now, I'm a big Never Nuggets guy. Nuggets playing the Clippers in round 1. The line has moved from Denver -3 to Denver -2.5 over on FanDuel. So, hey, if you like Nikola Jokic, you like Jamal Murray, Denver, they're a team that I do like this postseason, despite the fact that they did fire their coach and GM pretty late in the year. But the Clippers, they have an incredible defense. Kawhi Leonard is healthy, and that's a team that is a force to be reckoned with. So over on FanDuel, it's the place to go. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you, talking Ravens football. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Really appreciate all the support I've gotten here over the years, whether you are a video watcher, an audio listener, or both. You're not missing out any which way you decide to consume our content over here on Locked On Ravens. Also on social media, Twitter, Instagram at KOstreicher34. And whether you're an everyday or a first-time listener or somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member that we're here for them as well as here for you on Locked On Ravens. Now, let's get back to John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta. Eric DeCosta had a lot to say about the draft, had a lot to say about the potential positions Baltimore could be looking at, and did give some insight that I wanted to talk about. So, he was asked about whether the other rounds will be defensive heavy, given the team's needs, corner, safety, D-line, edge, and all that. He said, quote, "I think we'll stick to the board like we typically do historically. We've been a best available team. We believe that's the best way to approach it," which is just such a typical Ravens answer in a good way. It's like, that type of thing is going to come here, where regardless of who it is, obviously they're not going to take a quarterback in the first round or, early rounds. They're not going to get too crazy, but they're not a team that cares what position a guy plays as long as they can help and as long as they're talented. Like, they're going to take the guy that best fits their team, but best fits it in a way that they're also talented, not overreach for a player that they might have a second round grade on in the first round and then pass up a top 15 player on their board at 27. They're going to take the top 15 guy. So that just is what it is. DeCosta also pretty bullish on this year's draft class. It feels like he said, quote, "This is a pretty good draft class with players across the board." And, kind of alluded to the fact that, hey, there are probably multiple players they could get that could contribute early on for this Ravens team. Talked about the defensive line position, said it's a fairly defensive line class and an opportunity for the Ravens to get better. Said that's a priority because they lose Michael Pierce. Brent Urban's a free agent. You need some reinforcements there for sure. And there are going to be a lot of defensive linemen, not only in the first round, but day 2, day 3, that could really help Baltimore in the short and the long term. Now, one comment that was interesting to me was something we've talked about on the show here, if you've been a listener and have been checking in here with Locked On Ravens. I've talked about how can 11 picks even make the roster? That's how many they have. And Eric DeCosta said, quote, "It will be hard for 11 players to make the team right out of the gate. I like having 11 picks. I think he gives us a lot of flexibility. Our goal will be to have extra picks every year." What this tells me is I think the Ravens will try to consolidate a pick or two where, could end up with 9, could end up with 10 extra picks. Obviously means 8 or more. So I would probably say 9 or 10 is where Baltimore will end up. I think that's a sweet spot. You can say, hey, 9 or 10 guys, they could probably make the roster. 11 feels like probably one too many. He also said that about 15 prospects are off the board for failing physicals or other red flags. And, I know a lot of people talk about the Justin Tucker situation with that comment just on social media, but, the Ravens will always have whatever policies they have, not really sure based off of other things we've talked about, but said that the Ravens have 217 draftable players, Eric DeCosta did. He said there have been some years where they've struggled to find even 165 draftable guys. So, he said that the middle round picks in this draft are going to be very important. Again, you can find quality players. The Ravens always do, but like this draft in particular, not a lot of like top end talent at the very, very top of the class. But I think consistently through all 3 days, probably through like round 4 or 5, you can find a guy that can start for you or just have an impact on your team. So I think that's a really important part of this class. Derrick DeCosta did make sure to note. He talked about the kicker position. He was asked about that a bunch. He said, quote, "I think it's worth it if you have the right kicker. Just depends on the board, depends on the player, depends on how the coaches see him." Didn't say there was a blueprint finding a kicker, but trust the ability to evaluate. And everybody who does, he's, said Randy Brown is the guy who does a good job evaluating those guys. DeCosta also said he has spoken to Lamar Jackson about the roster, but, he's not going to say any of those conversations. But we know that, he and John Harbaugh have labeled Lamar Jackson very important in terms of decisions. And, he's not the be all end all, but like he does have a say. shareholder, stakeholder is what he's been referred to. So obviously he's going to have some level of, hey, I want this, I want that. We'll see what we can do type of influence. John Harbaugh spoke, and he said that he's hoping the team adds a kick/punt returner this draft, and said that Chris Horton is ranked the returners in this draft. The Ravens need one badly. They really haven't had a consistent one since Jacoby Jones. Rest in peace to Jacoby. But, it's been a while since Baltimore's had a consistent returner for multiple seasons. Hopefully they can break that trend this year. Eric DeCosta also said that he's fairly confident Ardarius Washington will return, but that shouldn't impact their draft plans in general. The Ravens will more than likely draft a safety, according to DeCosta. And in terms of just some other housekeeping stuff, DeCosta said that the team has a lot of different balls in the air, is what he said. The team's talking to free agents, talking to their own players, and continue to build the roster after the draft, something DeCosta made sure to say. He also said that they'll have no updates on the fifth-year option guys right now, like Hamilton and Linderbaum. Those are the two that they have to make decisions on, but they'll announce that when the time comes. So a lot of stuff to break down from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh there. Again, the Mark Andrews comment was the biggest thing, and that obviously set off a bunch of different chain reactions in terms of the conversation there. But seems like, again, my takeaways is that Baltimore is going to look at corner, look at safety, defensive line. I also think that for what Baltimore, is looking at right now, the defensive line is a big part of that, but the team feels like they can get a high-level player every day, and that's not just a matter of D-line. That's every position. I think they feel like they're confident with the way the board will fall to them. Mark Andrews, that feature's uncertain. Ardarius, I'd say he's likely to be back, and the team is not done making moves. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be breaking down more Ravens content, so be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form. Follow along in audio form for daily Ravens coverage, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.